Welcome to the second episode of Upstate Archives. My name is Christina, and each week I sit down with local experts to dig deep into the Capital Region's history. This week I am joined by Dr. Robert Faranik from the New York State Museum, and this week we are going to be talking about mastodons within the region. How are you doing today?
Doing great, thank you.
Of course. So, as I said, you're from the New York State Museum. You have a couple titles: Director of Research and Collections, Curator of Vertebrate Paleontology. Just to get us started, tell me a little bit about what you do at the museum and, your position and in your department and everything.
The main role right now is as the Director of Research and Collections. I oversee the scientific staff, the curatorial staff at the State Museum. So overseeing the different projects and the collections that the curators, they themselves oversee. And then also, I was originally hired as the Curator of Vertebrate Paleontology, and that I oversee the Cohoes Mastodon as one of the specimens that's in the collection that I oversee, and I still maintain that part of my job too.
Oh, awesome. And that was a good sort of segue into our conversation today, just about mastodons. Like you said, we're going to be discussing the Cohoes Mastodon today, and it turns out people might not really know this, but mastodons have a deep history here within the Capital Region. So would you just be able to start us off with a bit of a general history about mastodons? When did they sort of roam the earth, for how long, and all the sort of like basic tidbits?
Yep. So mastodons for New York State are like the Ice Age animal that we have, but they have a really, really long evolutionary history. So mastodons are part of the Proboscidean order. So elephants are the lineage today that are part of that bigger order, and that bigger Proboscidean order starts about 60 million years ago. And the first fossils come from places like Morocco and Egypt. And then they evolve over time, and then you have different tree branches kind of shoot off from the line. So it's not like a straight line where you go from these early fossils to elephants. It's much more like a bush where you have different lineages pop off. And mastodons, the mastodon lineage kind of breaks off from that in the tree branch about 25 million years ago. And they are mostly in Africa and Eurasia, and they come into North America, mastodons, about 15 to 16 million years ago. And the species, the genus of the name is called Zygolophodon. Zygolophodon will ultimately evolve in part into mammoth. Zygolophodon is part of the mastodon family, Mammoothidae. About 10-ish million years ago, the mammoth line themselves break off of that Zygolophodon line, and then they branch themselves into different species. And mammoth is one of the branches that breaks off. And the first mammoth fossils, Mammoth americanum fossils that we see, is about 3.5 to 4 million years ago. And this species is cosmopolitan across North America. So we have fossils that are from Alaska to Florida to New York State and the Great Lakes regions, into Canada, Nova Scotia, and all the way down into Mexico. So they kind of get here, and they just kind of they're found all over the place, fossils everywhere.
Wow. And when were the first fossils found in the Capital Region?
So this is an interesting fun fact. I'm sure the indigenous peoples found fossils first because we have fossils everywhere. But for Europeans and for writing in scientific papers, the first real kind of fossil that was found for vertebrate paleontology in the United States that was ultimately written up was found in Claverack in 1705.
Wow.
And we think of Claverack today as kind of this little town a little bit east of the Hudson River. But in 1705, Claverack was much broader and extended to where Hudson was. So this particular fossil was found along the Hudson River, just north of what is now the town of Hudson. Wow. And it was found by a tenant farmer. So this was part of Rensselaerwyck. And it was found by a Dutch tenant farmer that was on the land. And he found the fossil, and he wasn't really excited, seemingly too excited by it. he showed it to an assembly person named Van Bruggen, and Van Bruggen was like, "Hey, do you want this?" And the guy was like, "Eh," and he offered him seemingly, I think it was like a cup of rum. He sold the tooth for, and Van Bruggen, I think, was much more excited, and it was an assembly member here in Albany, but brought it to the person's name. He was the Lord Cornbury, Viscount of Cornbury, and his name was, I think, Edward Hyde, and they got talking, and Van Bruggen gave that tooth to Lord Cornbury, who then kind of was excited about it and then knew of the Royal Society in London and sent that particular tooth to London. Once that happened, kind of news got spread around, and people, I think, got really excited about it. And there's more people got sent back to the location where they had found the original tooth, found another tooth and some bones, excavated those. The bones themselves were very fragile and broke apart. But it kind of got everyone excited, got into the newspapers. There's I forget, it was a newspaper out of Boston. And I kind of drummed up a lot of kind of excitement. A lot of kind of scholarly people, later on, Cotton Mather, who was of Salem witch trial fame, wrote his own paper based on the accounts of Lord Cornbury and from the newspaper article, and he himself sent that article to the Royal Society papers, and that got published about 7 or 8 years later. So a lot of people got really excited about it and tried to equate these fossils with things that they were reading in the Bible, they didn't really know what they were looking at. They all they saw was a big tooth, and they equated it to early on in Genesis in the Bible, there's descriptions of giants, and they tried to equate it to these giants that were in the Bible. We didn't know that things went extinct, so they were talking about these giants kind of living around at a certain time and then have died off, but not extinct. So there was, I think, a really big, there was a lot of news around it, kind of orally and in the newspaper, that people got excited about. There were other farmers that got wind of it and brought the other fossils that they had found around New England to clergy members and other, I guess, learned people of the time. So we have for vertebrate paleontology in the United States, New York has a really, really long history, historically speaking.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like even personally, I mean, you just went through this like sort of groundbreaking discovery just in Columbia County. And I feel like personally, I learned about mastodons, I learned about mammoths in school, but I never knew that it was so close to home. I just grew up in Niskayuna. So just to hear that, it's so close to home, this like sort of giant scientific discovery is so cool. And that's actually going to bring us to our first break for right now. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Upstate Archives. I'm with Dr. Faranick about mastodons today. So let's move on to the big discussion that we've been looking forward to all episode, the Cohoes mastodon. The New York State Museum has the skeleton, is that correct?
Yes.
At the entrance, I believe, right?
We moved it to the back of the museum a few years ago.
Back of the museum. All right, perfect. So give us a little bit of an introduction to those who might not really know about a mastodon that was found just in Cohoes.
Yep. So in 1866, Harmony Mill, which is still, the building is still there, it's now an apartment complex, was building a new building. And as they were digging for their foundation, the workers noticed a jawbone and a foot bone of what turns out to be the Cohoes mastodon. Because of this what was going to be the State Museum, the Geological and Natural History surveys, and being so close in Albany, a really famous paleontologist named James Hall got called, and he came out and kind of looked at the site and was like, yes, this turns out to be an important thing. Of about 20 years prior to that, you had a couple other mastodons being excavated out of Orange County, New York. One was called the Warren Mastodon. The Warren Mastodon is now on display at the American Museum of Natural History in the city.
Oh, wow.
So when James Hall went and saw that, this fossil was found about 60 feet below the surface that they were digging, so pretty far down.
Yeah.
And they started to excavate around there. James Hall actually hurts himself and calls in another person named G.K. Gilbert, Grove Carl Gilbert, which is an awesome name, from a company called Ward Scientific. And Ward Scientific is out of Rochester and is still around today. They sell chemicals and other scientific equipment. But they called Ward and said, hey, do you have anybody that can help us out? And he sends G.K. Gilbert. And the reason why I mention him is he becomes his own, like a famous geologist in his own right after having worked on the Cohoes Mastodon. So they work and try to excavate the Cohoes Mastodon for a few weeks, and then it gets too cold. The water starts to freeze, and they can't get anything out. And they wait until the end of February, and they go back and they excavate out some remaining bones out of what turns out to be a glacial pothole. So if you walk the streams around here, walk the rivers when it's dry out, you can kind of see these little potholes in the ground, and sometimes you'll see little rocks that are in the bottom of them. And we think this was a big pothole that was formed sometime during the glacial period. We're not exactly sure because it's not really easy to date. These rocks are really, really old,
right.
Hundreds of millions of years old, but the hole itself is probably from the Ice Age, but it might not have been from the latest Ice Age period.
Wow.
So the bones were there, and Hall was excited because if you read some of the newspaper articles, like they thought it might end up being the most complete specimen that they knew from New York State. And the Warren Mastodon turns out to be the most complete, I think, at the time. And they thought maybe the Cohoes was even more complete. We found, I said we as paleontologists, they found, I would say about 40% in total by the number of bones, but they have kind of all of the important, like, big pieces. So it's like 90% by weight, but 40% in total numbers.
Right, wow.
And so you have the head and the big leg pieces, a lot of the vertebrae, and when the Geological and Natural History Survey started, and the state sent people around the state to find different things, geological resources or mammals, and they started collecting specimens. They brought it back to the museum, and they showcased it in different museum buildings. So Hall worked it out with the owner, his name was Alfred Wild, of Harmony Mill to obtain the specimen. And then once we got it, it was very, very quickly started to be put up as a full and complete skeleton. And it's more or less been on display since it was found and put up by the museum. Even Harmony Mill had it on display in the mill for a little while. Wow. Apparently they took it to like the county fair to bones, which is awesome. But then once we received it, very quickly we put it up. So one of the specimens, I don't know if people can see it, one of the specimens that we have, I've brought a cast of a vertebrae that has hopefully I can show it. This is the cast of the original mount of the Cohoes Mastodon. This isn't a real vertebrae, but what I love about this, and I'll try and get it as close to the camera as I can, is it's got the name E.E. Howell, April 29th, 1867 on it. And so besides G.K. Gilbert, Hall brought in this other person named Edwin Howell, both of these guys were about 20 at the time. And Edwin Howell also becomes a famous geologist after he works on the Cohoes Mastodon. And he and Gilbert, under the supervision of Hall, kind of go out and find the missing bone pieces like this one in Boston and recreate what they don't have and put the specimen up in what ultimately is Geological and Agricultural Hall in Albany.
Wow. And I know you sent over some photos as well. I mean, is this what the mastodon's, is it the jawbone?
That's the lower jaw. Yep. And that's from pictures that I believe are from when it was first excavated and displayed in Geological and Agricultural Hall.
Wow. And this photo is really, really interesting to me because you have that chair as a scale just to see how massive these bones are.
Yes.
That's just crazy. And what's going on here? Is this sort of like during the...
So that's where it was first put up. It's mount in Geological and Agricultural Hall.
Wow.
You're seeing the back end and then the Cohoes Mastodon. And I know that this picture on the right-hand side is older than 1869 because the museum bought the deer animal there on the left is a Irish elk from Britain, and we bought that from Ward's again in 1869.
Wow, that's really cool. And then we have this photo as well that you sent over. Who are these these fellows?
So that is, on the left is G.K. Gilbert, in the middle is James Hall, and on the right-hand side is Edwin Howell. So that's basically right when they're done putting it back up. And I believe it was open to the public in December of 1867. So the turnover and the mounting was pretty quick.
Wow, that's really amazing. And then this is what it looks like today in the museum, correct?
Yes.
I mean, it's just massive. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about what do the remains tell us about this mastodon's life?
So there was a paleontologist out of Michigan that before I started at the museum, did a really comprehensive study of the Cohoes Mastodon. So there was carbon date, even before he got it, there was carbon dates done on it. And I've done 2 more. And we know this individual was last alive about 13,100 years ago.
Wow.
But this professor out of Michigan, his name was Dr. Daniel Fisher. He just retired recently, actually. But he did a study of the bones and also looked at the tusks. And if you look at elephant tusks or mastodon tusks or mammoth tusks, they're like tree rings, or like if you're stacking traffic cones. Yeah. And so you can count the rings and figure out how old the individual was. Oh. And if you look at what's interesting is, so when they counted the rings, they counted 32 rings. So we know that the Cohoes Mastodon was 32 when he died. We know the mastodon is a he because the size of the tusks and the size of the animal. So mastodons, like humans, are sexually dimorphic. The males are typically bigger than the females.
Oh, okay.
But the Cohoes Mastodon is a smaller male compared to other mastodons. And if you look at his long bones, and that's where you grow is typically on your long bones and at the edges of your long bones, his long bones are unfused, and that's more typical of what we would think of like a teenager. Mm. Once those bones fuse together, you stop growing. So until about the year 2000, people thought that the Cohoes Mastodon was a teenager because his bones hadn't fused. If you look at the rings, besides counting them, you can look at chemicals in the teeth and the tusks and actually in the bones. And it tells you about what they're eating and their nutrition. And there was something funny that went on when the animal was 11, the individual Cohoes Mastodon. And then he died when he was 32. But right around when he was started to be 25-ish, he started to go through seasonal bouts of starvation. Oh. And if you look at the skull of the Cohoes Mastodon on the jaw on the right-hand side, basically right in the middle, there's a weird shape. It's kind of a little bit concave, and there's a crack in it, and it has a little kind of funny shape to it. And you can see on the picture, I'll point to the pictures, is what we think happened is male mastodons, we think like male elephants, go through periods called must, where they're fighting other male elephants to get access to females, to get a girlfriend. And we think happened is when he was 11 years old, he was in one of these battles and got a tusk to the jaw.
Oof.
And it didn't kill him, but it really messed him up a little bit. So if you look at the tooth, his tooth that is in the jaw is pointing forward and in a little bit.
Oh.
And then if you look at it, if I am lucky enough that I get to go up and look at it every once in a while, it is perfect. It is pristine and more or less unused.
Oh, wow.
And the teeth behind it on that side never developed. There should be another tooth that's there, and it's just not there. And that will come back later on in a part of this that'll tell. So we think, and nutritionally, you can look at these chemicals, that he went through like a really bad nutritional state, but he obviously didn't die. And then after a couple of years, he's fine. Like he looks like what a normal male mastodon would look like. Mm-hmm. And like I said before, when he was 25-ish, he's getting a little older. It's like middle-aged, but he starts to go through seasonal bouts of what looks to be like he's not getting enough nutrition. He might not be starving, like in a scientific sense, but he's not getting enough food. And then when he's 32 years old, when he dies, if you look on the other side of the skull, in the temple area, and you can focus in, there's a cheekbone, and just above the cheekbone, kind of inwards toward the skull, there's another circular wound that, compared to what happened on the jaw, is unhealed. And we think he was in another fight. And I say we as in paleontologists. I did none of this work. But they think that he was in another fight and got a tusk to the temple, and that's what killed him.
Oh, that's really sad.
Yeah. And then somehow he died, and then he was floating in or down the Mohawk River, and then got deposited in this giant pothole. And so you have some of the bones, this pothole is really, really big, and some of the bones sit on one layer, and some of the bones fall deeper down. So the jaw and a couple of the bones fall deeper down in the pothole, and other bones are like 20 feet higher than these bones, where the rest of the skeleton was found.
Wow. That's so fascinating, just how you got so much information just from, what you said, 40% of the total bones of this skeleton. That's really amazing. And it's like, we already see so much of his life, and it's just from just a few things. That's so awesome. But that'll bring us to our last break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Upstate Archives. I'm still sort of reeling from our conversation about the Cohoes Mastodon. I mean, like we said, there's just so much that we've learned, and I feel kind of sad that he died. but so much that we've learned from him. And to close out our show, I mean, there's just so much more that people can find at the New York State Museum about mastodons. Just tell us a little bit more, just what other discoveries has the New York State Museum made in recent years? What more can people find, and how can they find more information?
So I think starting off with recent finds that we have, we were fortunate enough to get called last year. There was a homeowner in Orange County that actually found what turns out to be a full jaw and other bones of a mastodon down near Scotchtown, New York. And we were fortunate to be able to go help professors at SUNY Orange to go excavate this jaw, and then they later went back with students and excavated out the vertebrae, and we now have it at the State Museum. So it's being conserved there, and we're going to try and do similar things that this professor, Dan Fisher, at Michigan, did on the Cohoes mastodon. We're going to try to do similar things with this mastodon that was found last year in Orange County. At the museum, we have the Cohoes Mastodon exhibit, the picture that you saw, that kind of gives a background of that particular individual. But there's other teeth and little tusks that are on display also with the Cohoes mastodon. And one of the teeth that I think is really fascinating is it's another tooth. It's looks very white. So I brought one of the teeth of the Cohoes mastodon, but the other tooth that's on display is also from Cohoes. And for a long time, people thought that when you saw the picture, that where the tooth on the right-hand side was kind of pointed forward and backwards and there was no tooth behind it, that this tooth might be the missing tooth. And we know that it wasn't missing, it just didn't develop. So a few years ago, I carbon dated this other tooth that was from Cohoes, and it turns out to be about 30,000 years old, as opposed to 13,000 years old. So you can use these specimens to learn about their snapshots in time of what New York was like in the past. And so you had mentioned previously that like you grew up in and around Schenectady. There's a fossil mastodon found in South Schenectady.
Oh, wow.
And if you know where the National Guard base is with the big airplanes, they actually found a reindeer antler right near that. So there's Ice Age animals pretty much. There are Ice Age animals everywhere across New York and a lot of different places around the capital region. There was a fossil found in Queens. There's fossils. The second fossil ever found outside of Claverack was found in Coxsackie.
Wow.
So there's these specimens that were found all over the capital region and then down through the Hudson Valley. Other resources that the State Museum can provide you is we have a really good, there's an Ice Age animal exhibit that's there on now, but you can also see that if you can't make it to the museum, that there's a web page. There's also, I think, a really good Cohoes Mastodon web page. And on those too is we have 3D scans of particular specimens in the collection. So you can look at them on your screen from your computer, or if you have the ability, I know a lot of schools or libraries have 3D printers, you can actually print out at different scales. You can make a full-size one or a small one of different parts of the Cohoes mastodon or different parts of different Ice Age animals, so that people of the state of New York can kind of experience these things. Like I am so fortunate enough to get to see the actual thing in the museums and be able to touch them every day because of my job. But it gives people the ability to kind of interact with the fossils also.
Wow, that's really amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Faranik, for joining me today. I really had a good time. Do you want to show? I know you brought one more little fossil.
So I did want to show, a lot of times people have a confusion between woolly mammoths and mastodons. They kind of both look like hairy elephants. And in the beginning, we talked about the mastodon line breaks off about from elephant lineage about 25 million years ago. Mammoths break off much more recent. Mammoths are in the elephant family, and so their teeth are very similar. So this is actually one of the teeth of the Cohoes mastodon, and it's cut because that was the professor at Michigan was studying these, Dan Fisher. It has growth lines in it, just like the tusks do. But this is a baby mammoth tooth, one of my favorites in the museum. This was found in Salina, New York, out near Syracuse. But you can see kind of the difference that this tooth is much more flat, kind of like a cow or a horse, and then this tooth is more like ours. Mastodons would be eating conifer needles and twigs, where your mammoths would have been eating tundra plants like low-lying grasses, sedges, and these little tundra plants that are on the landscape when they were around.
Wow.
So I like bringing it because it's super small and cute.
It is really cute. Wow, that's just so awesome. Thank you again for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And that'll bring us to the end of this episode of Upstate Archives. Catch us again next week. Thank you so much.